Right, rook and pawn versus rook and long side defensive techniques. Um, these these ideas are extremely hard. I've got to confess I don't think that I fully understand it. I mean, I understand that the defending side wants to get their king to the short side. We've got an attacking side with a pawn on the sixth rank here that's incredibly dangerous. This is very hard for black to draw, but it can be drawn if you can get what's called distant effectiveness. So if you've got enough space over here to deliver some checks with the black rook, it can be drawn. This position here is a win for white, but because this rook hasn't quite got enough space, and we'll see that now. I'll go through it as like the textbook says it, and then I'm going to attempt to try and win this position as white against Stockfish, and I'm sure Stockfish will do something different to what the textbook says and make me have to think about it. What I'm then going to do is play a couple of silly moves. Obviously that's a ridiculous move, followed by that equally ridiculous move. And then I'm going to play that position as black against Stockfish after going through why, if the rook is on the a8 square, this is now actually a draw. It's very hard to draw, but it is a draw. Anyway, let's go back to this position. It's white to play. Although this is white to play and win, against perfect play, you have to tread very carefully here. There's only one winning move, and if you didn't know what you were doing, you probably wouldn't find it. Because that one winning move is you basically need to recreate this position, but with black to move. And you do it by triangulating with the king. You don't want to leave the A file, because then black takes it, and we know that's a draw. Or we don't, but it is. And we don't want to leave the 7th rank, because then black will just start delivering checks straight away. So you want to recreate this position with black to move, and you do it by king d6 check. The black king comes into f6, and then we go king d7. And there's not really much black can do there other than go king g7. Otherwise, we're just pushing the e pawn. Yeah, it's going to be absolutely very hard for black to defend, basically. Yeah, so if black just moved the rook, we can push the e pawn. The king's ready to go to e8 and get the Lucena position. So king back to g7, king e7, and we've recreated that position, but crucially it's with black to move. Now, a8's really where black wants their rook, but you could still say b8's a pretty good second best. It's not good enough, but it's still a good square for the rook. So black's best try here is probably just to play a waiting move. And this unusual looking king g6, this waiting around on the g6 and g7 squares, is actually the way to draw this if your rook is on a8, which sadly is not. So king g6. But the reason king g6 is no good here is because the black king is no longer able to play to f8. We'll see why that's important in a minute. White can come down with the rook. Rook a1. Black then starts the checks from the long side, but this long side is not quite long enough. It's just been shortened. King d6, rook b6 check, king d7, rook b7, king c6, rook to b8, nice try, but king c7, and the black rook has to leave. Down to b2, but here's the killer move, rook e1. And the black king can't get back. If it was on g7, king f8 would now draw the game, which is why in the original position, if you didn't do that triangulation to give the move to black and you just brought your rook down straight away, it would have just been a draw. Here it's not a draw. Rook c2 check, and we are going to get the Lucena position. So I'm now going to attempt that against Stockfish. So this position here, but I'm going to try and win it. I mean, what I've just shown you there is what it says in the textbooks, but let's see how Stockfish deals with it. So yeah, don't bring the rook down, because this king is ready to go to f8, and that series of checks would be enough for black to draw it. Instead, let's do this triangulation trick. So the king will come to f. The king will come to f6, and then we'll do the triangulation. Oh my god! Right, so This is what engines do. This way is you read these things in the textbook and you think, yeah, I understand it now, and then you should practice against an engine because they do these things. King f8. What do we do against this? Well, I don't want the black king coming to e8, so I presume the same thing. Yeah, do the same thing. Black's rook's got nowhere to go. King g7. Hey! There you go. That's the first challenge overcome. I've done the triangulation. King to g6, politely following the textbook. And now rook to a1, because the king g6 means that the black king can't get to f8. There is a king d8 version of that, by the way. It's also winning and involves some tactic, which I haven't fully investigated yet. King to... Oh, I did investigate once, but I've forgotten what it is. King d7, and now rook b7 check, presumably. King c6. Are they going to go rook b8? King c7. Okay, that's different from the textbook. If the rook had gone to b8, I would have king c7, rook down to b2, and then I'd play rook e1. If I play rook e1 now, is that different because I can't get to the d8 square? I don't think so. I don't think I want to get to the d8 square. I think this route's good enough. I think rook e1 is just still fine. And I think this is a win. There's definitely nothing the d8 square offers me that the d7 square doesn't, other than the chance to come back to no, in fact, that's what I said was true, isn't it? The chance to come back to d6, which is not something I'm interested in anyway, was actually a part of the d7 square. And now we just push the e-pawn. It's an interesting move. Albeit a pretty silly one. What's the point of that then? Engines do strange things, don't they? Rook a7, I presume. And I don't think we need to do any more of this, do we? That's obviously a win. So I'll take that. I don't think we need to see any more of that. So let's resign that. That's incredibly generous, obviously. It didn't have any material left, but I still resigned. And now let's go back to this original position. Well, if we play those first two silly moves, rook d7. I've set it up actually so that white now plays rook d7. Yeah, let's go through this. Why this is a draw with the black rook on a8. So we might see rook d7, and now it's black's turn. Now, what I'm going to be doing as black when I play this against Stockfish is do not leave the first rank and do not leave the A file. As much as possible, you do not want to move your rook. It's just in such a good place. And you play waiting moves with your king. You leave your king waiting around on the g6 and g7 squares, and you only bring your rook up to check the king when it's necessary. So king g6, rook d6, for example. This rook being on our third rank as black or white's sixth rank is extremely useful. Okay, so if we see, I don't know, king g7, let's say white does a little triangulation trick here, rook d6. So this is definitely something I would try as white, because if you had this position as black, there's only one drawing move from here, which is to repeat king g6. Everything else loses, including the natural rook a7 check. You cannot deliver this check when the white rook is brilliantly placed on d6. And the reason is that white will play king e8. Now what do we do? If king f6, that e7's arriving with check. And if rook a8 check, rook to d8, the Lucena position is about to be happening. We might see rook a7, e7, king f6, rook d6 check, and that's kind of a transposition. So, yeah, you can't play rook a7 check. Okay, sometimes you have to play rook a7 check, but only if white's threatening something, and white is not threatening anything here. So you just play the waiting move, king to g6. That's right, I need to check what time it is. What's my cuckoo clock cuckooing in there? Can you cuckoo? Is that a verb? In the background. The cuckoo clock's probably not even been caught on the background noise, and you're thinking, what are you talking about? King g6, and then when rook down to d1, then you begin your series of checks. Okay. If white goes to e8, then you come into f6. And that's why your king was hovering around on g6 and g7. If the white king comes out, you just keep checking, because the extra distance means that we can't come and hit the rook. And we're going to go around in circles, rook d7, rook back to a8. So it is a draw. I think I've been through everything the textbook says, but now I'm going to try and draw it against Stockfish. And this could now go horribly wrong. So Stockfish has played this rook d7 move, and I'm going to kick off with the double exclamation mark textbook move of king g6. And rook, sorry, it wasn't actually the textbook version, because the rook was already on d6 in that one. Yeah, so I don't think white's threatening anything, so I'll just come back to g7. Basically, that's a nice easy start. I do not want my rook leaving a8. It's not going to give me a free fold straight away. Now when the rook disappears back up there, this threat is nasty. And I'm not even 100% sure. I haven't learnt what my next move is. But I've said in a previous video that if you're doing some sort of, you know a particular position to draw, or you know a particular position to win, but you're not quite sure what the next move should be. Like, I know this position to draw, but I don't know what the next move should be. You can kind of get it by process of elimination. If we don't check this king, this is happening next move, and we're dead. So it's got to be rook a7 check. This rook a7 check is a disaster if the white rook is on the sick rank, because white would play king e8. But king e8 is not going to be a problem in that position with the rook back on d1, because we could play king f6. So it looks like I've got that right. Rook a8. And now we do not want to play this. Okay, this is a greatly placed rook, and this is, I think this is the double exclamation mark king g6 that should be played. Oh dear, don't like that. Rook c6. I think I will just play that. I can't see what white's threatening. I mean, apparently a golden rule with this is, if you don't have to move your rook away from a8, don't, because it will just lead to tears. What's Stockfish going to try next? Right, this is slightly different, because we're now being threatened to be checked away. But this time we're on the g6 square. I definitely don't want to be playing that move. That's going to end in tears. So it's got to be the same thing. I've got to check the king. Okay. If this is a draw, which I know it is, I know I haven't messed it up yet, then yeah, that check must be right. Okay, now I'm not so sure. It feels like I should just keep checking. Or maybe just come back to a8. Definitely not this, because rook f3 check looks like a disaster. I don't want to bring my king back. I think rook c7 check actually wins for white there. So it can't be a king move backwards. What do we think of rook a8? A little bit nervous about the e-pawn push. This might be where I'm about to mess it up. Let's have a look. Check. Are we going to see rook c6? Rook back to a8. Bit worried about. Okay. Now surely a king move. Or maybe king f6. Because if we were in the position where the white king was here and our king was here and white had played that, would we not want to follow it in? King f6, e7. King f7. I think that's okay. Don't like that. Now what? These engines they try. I bet you this is still drawn. King g7. He's got king d6 check. Oh no, but then I can move my king back. Hey, I think I did something right there. Brilliant. If anyone watching this video is in any doubt whatsoever that I obviously haven't fully grasped this, then yeah, I can tell you that I haven't fully grasped this, but I'm hanging on here. Got to move 20 so far. Rook c3. Now, is this where I want to do some checks? I think it is want to do some checks, isn't it? I'm just going to do a bunch of checks now. I don't mind the rook blocking because I'll come back to a8. Uh-oh. As soon as this is threatened, I reckon we're getting the hang of this. Rook there check, rook c6, rook back to a8. You can see how hard to defend this is. Oh, this looks like progress. This looks like very good news. Have we done it? Have we actually managed to get there? I'm looking at king f6, obviously. If I get checked this way, I will come into e7, and I've got the Philidor position. I've already stopped the white king coming back this way. King f6. Any rook swap on c6, and I take the e-pawn afterwards. This looks like a pretty good threat. Rook c7. And then, can I not just take the pawn? I reckon we've done it. King f6. Go on. I think this is it. king e7. I think this is just a draw now. I think I've got... Wow, I've sort of surprised myself there. And now we rook back up here, because if we're in the Philidor position, white's already pushed that pawn. We'll probably see, and then we just check forever. That pawn started this position on e6, and then we're on move 32. I definitely think some of what just happened was a bit of luck. I don't think I fully understand this this long-sided defense, but you can see I've got a reasonably good grasp of it. And you can, and I hope that, I mean, the main point, I'm producing a video here of it, so at least I've shown enough of it to sort of where you can see what the main ideas are and go and practice it yourselves, because there's no way you can like read a textbook and understand this, or listen to me waffling on about it and understand it. You have to go and practice it yourselves. It is very, very hard. I think I've at the very least I've demonstrated it's very, very hard. But at the end of the day, it looks like I did do it, so I'm quite chuffed with myself for doing that. And after we've oh, hang on, did I make a mistake there? Probably should have played rook there, but here we go. And it's done. And now we shall go and look at some games where this long-sided defence was massively central. See, not only do you need to be able to do it and understand it, but arriving in that position and moves that then will transpose into that position. It's like, oh, if I do that, I do that, then we end up in that long-sided defence. But it's the losing version because you haven't got your rook on a8, and it is hard. It is very, very hard. But, you know, unless we try to get good at these things that are hard, well, what's the point? You know, we might as well just all play blitz chess against each other, just sort of Mickey Mouse rubbish all the time, and none of us get any better. This is my attempt to get better. Right, let's go and look at the games. Right, we'll kick off with this one. This is actually the second part of a game that I'll show the first part of later, so we're going to arrive at this position again later on. This is a game from 2017. It is black to play. Pause the video and see if you can work out whether black can win this, basically. In the game, rook f8 was played, which doesn't win. White executed a slightly easier version of long-sided defence, to be honest. There's not really anything particularly complicated going on here. It's just check the hell out of the black king. Rook a1 check, king d2, rook a2 check, king d3, and the white rook just chased the black king up the board, checking at any given time. If the black king goes to the c file, the white rook comes to the e file. So the black king goes all the way upstairs. I maybe at this stage had a plan to come back downstairs on the f file or something, I don't know. Tried this sneaky little move here, but white just kept checking. And there they agreed to draw. So no good, can't do that. The winning move is rook f2 check. Little intermezzo check. If king g3, king f1, black's dead. So the reason rook f2 check is good is because it forces, to stop king f1, it forces the white king to g1. Then you can play rook f8. What's so good about this? We can just chase the king up the board again. But this time you can't. So king d2, rook a2 check, king e3, rook a3 check, king d4, rook a4 check. If, by the way, white had played rook a1, the tactic underpinning all of this is rook a8. How about that? And we might see rook b1, and then the king's in, e3, rook b3 check, king d2, rook b2 check, hold on to the e-pawn, rook b1, king c2, rook e1, king d2, and it's over. So it was that little deflection tactic and white would have been forced to go into a queen versus a rook. If white carries on just trying to check the king, saying, well, that's a nice trick, but I'm never going to play a non-check, well, good luck with that. Like rook a1 here, we have the same trick. That's going to transpose. And if the checks carry on, okay, when the rook comes behind the e-pawn, the crucial difference in all of this between the king being on g1 and the king being on g2, by forcing the king to g1, this rook e3 defense doesn't work, because you play rook f1 check, and then you queen. How cool is that? And yeah, like I said, did I mention that this is the end position of another game we're going to look at later on? Yeah, and you have to win it with this intermezzo rook f2 check, and then being aware of, oh, where's it gone? This deflection tactic. Right, next. This is Aronian versus Magnus Carlsen, 2006. It is black, Magnus Carlsen to play. What should you do? And just to sort of illustrate how hard this is, I don't think anyone could disagree that Magnus Carlsen's a pretty damn good chess player. He now went wrong with rook a7 check, king e8, and then he just resigned. Okay, so by his standards, that's obviously a blunder. He sort of forgot his endgame theory or whatever. And remember that in this position, the black rook being on a8 is just ideally placed. You do not want to come off the first rank or the 8th rank, because king e8 is going to reach the Lucena position, and you don't want to come off the a file, because then white will take the a file and you haven't got enough distant effectiveness in your checks, so you have to play a waiting move. King g6 is the textbook waiting move. You might see rook b7, then you check, rook a7 check, and the king can come in. We didn't sort of see that variation actually. But e7, we could just take that. So yeah, even arguably the greatest player of all time managed to not find king g6 in that position. So I think the rest of us can be forgiven for finding this hard. Right, next, this is also black to play. This is a game from 2011. Pause the video and decide what would you do here as black. So this is a game from 2011, and we're about to see both players sort of go wrong in not obvious ways either. Like, you can hardly call them big blunders because these positions are so hard. There are 4 winning moves for black. Rook f6, rook f7 or rook f8 all win. But if you wanted to be consistent with what we've discussed, the white rook hasn't got distant effectiveness. It wants to be on the h1 square. So the best move that black can play to sort of along that theme is rook h2 straight away. I'm not saying that I would have been able to carry it on afterwards, but you know, that is a move that I would have played. I like to think I would have understood enough about this to have played that move, and then maybe gone wrong in a minute. Yeah, and the point is, for example, if white, we had the black rook on b8, didn't we, and the king here on g7, so it's just a mirror image of that. If white says, okay, well, I'll just play that waiting move, the point is there's not enough distant effectiveness in the white rook's checks, so we'd see rook h8 check, rook h8, sorry, and then, oh, that was the, I wonder if we're about to see that strange tactic thing I talked about, so king e3 is the move that would be consistent with what we've already seen. But king e1, let's see if we get to transpose. Well, I suppose that does transpose straight away. King f2, rook back up to g7. So we have transpose now, and then here's the killer move again, rook d8, And after rook f7 check, king e2, rook e7 check, king d1, and we would reach the Lucena position. So after this rook h2, in the game, rook g7 was played. And now black wins in a couple of ways, because white's rook hasn't got distant effectiveness. Arguably the simplest one is just to play king e2, threaten to push the d pawn. If you get checked on the e file, we can come to d1, and if the king comes into c3, we can still play d2, and the king's ready to come into d1. I think that would be sort of consistent with what we've discussed. But again, having this back rank, this first rank for white, and sort of seeing why it's so important, is that another way to win this here is rook h1. And the idea here is that after getting checked, the king pops out this way, and the white rook hasn't got enough distance to give the checks. Rook g2 check, king f3, rook back up, d2. And this rook's already supporting this pawn's promotion. There's no way that white can get their king and rook to cover the d1 square in the next one move. All white could do is just give a bunch of token checks to the black king, which will zigzag its way up to hit the rook on the it could do it on the E, F and G files, no problem. So yeah, that's how it would have been won from there. In the game though, strangely, having played that brilliant rook h2, we saw rook g7. Black then went rook h8 and gave up the win. White then started the series of checks. Rook g2 check, king e3, rook g3 check, king e2, rook g2 check, king f3. And now white can draw this very happily. The black king's too far away, and white should just bring their rook back up here to g7. If the black king comes back to e2, we just go back and repeat. If the black rook tries to cut off the white king, then we go to h7, and now we have got the distant effectiveness. d2, we just check, check until we're allowed to come to the d file. This is almost exactly the same as that first game I showed, where we had to play that intermezzo rook f2 check on the first move to force the black king to g1. So here the white king, or was it the white king, hasn't been forced to b1. So it must have been the white king. So yeah, it hasn't been forced to b1, so you're okay, because there is no, at this stage it would be rook c1 check followed by d1 equals queen, but rook c1 is not check, of course. That rook c1 loses the game because you drop your rook. But in the game, white didn't play rook g7. White played rook d2, and it's now gone. And there were no more mistakes after this. King e3, king c1, rook h1 check, rook d1 takes d2. Oh dear. Right, next, let me check how I'm doing for time. There's about half an hour in. Yeah, let's keep going. Even if it takes a while, we've still got some 3 more positions to show. Recently, my recording software has been cutting out anyway, so I might end up having to make a 1 and 2 version of this video. This is white to play. Pause the video and decide what would you do here. So in the game, white blundered away the win with king to d7 check, of course. Black picks up the g-pawn and white pushes the e-pawn. But now black played rook a1, and which blundered the win back again. Okay, this is a very blundered the draw away, sorry, so now white's winning again. But that was bad luck, that rook a1 move. It is going to be a long-sided defence that's going to work here, but it has to kick off. This is where it gets incredibly hard. It has to kick off with rook e1. You have to hit the e-pawn first, so that when white pushes it, you come in king f6. If the rook pops back to d2, then you come onto the long side rook a1. we'd see rook f2 check, king g7, e7, and there we have the checks starting out. In the actual game, black played rook a1, and it was premature because the king's sort of a bit too offside. e6, rook a7 check, king to e8, king into f6, e7 arrives with check, king g7, rook back to d1, king f6, and king f8. And black actually resigned there. So white did get the win by playing king to d7 check, but shouldn't have done, because after this e5 move, black could draw still with rook e1, e6, king f6, and then pop over to the long side. Yeah, good luck finding all these moves in a game. But white can win this by playing, not by playing rook d5. You might have thought rook d5 is quite a good move, but then rook a1 really is, going to the long side straight away. This pawn's still being hit, and this rook's going to be very effective delivering checks and hindering on the long side. Yeah, white can win this in the original position by playing king to e7 check. So this time when black takes the g-pawn, e5, if rook to e1, then e6, and the black king can't get into f6. Okay, so instead we might see rook a1, e6. The king, what black wants to do here, by the way, they want to play king g6 and rook a8, and that's then a draw, but they haven't got time for both of those moves. So king g6, and yeah, I mean, this could now just be the same as the Magnus Carlsen game, couldn't it? Magnus Carlsen had his rook on a8 when the king was on g7 and sort of blundered with rook a7, and then king e8 was the response to that, because we're not controlling this first rank, and it is the only winning move, king e8. If rook a8 check, rook to d8 blocks, rook a6, e7, king f6, and rook f8, and it's over. Right, next, this is from 2017, this game. It is black to play, obviously, because black's in check. What do you reckon? Do you need to hold on to this pawn? Or do you just come in and grab this one? King d6 or king d4? Pause the video, have a think about it. So in the game, black played king d4, and it was a mistake. This position is now drawn. Okay. Rook c4 check, king d3, rook went over to the long side, e4, and white carried on playing this very well. Rook a3 check. Okay. It's incredibly hard to get this right, though. If you come in with the king now, king g4, it's lost. Black pushes the e-pawn, rook a3 check, king d2, rook a2 check, king to e1, rook a1 check, king f2, rook a2 check, e2. Okay, so you can't come in to g4 at this stage, because black just pushes the e-pawn. You have to give this check first, rook a3 check, king e2, then come in with the king. Okay, this is what actually happened in the game, and it's the only drawing move at this stage is king g4. Yeah, if you play rook a2 check, you've now lost because the black king comes back up to f3 and shoulders the white king away, so you have to play king g4. When the e-pawn gets pushed, yeah, it's very, very sad because white had played all these brilliant moves and now has to play king g3. King g3 is still the only drawing move. In the game, rook a2 check was played, and it's a similar sort of problem. The white king can come to e1, and it's that the black king come to e1 and can now get back out again on f2 if it's checked again. So king g3, but then the e2 pawn is pushed, and white played king g2, but also resigned at the same time. Actually, no, they didn't resign at the same time. Sorry, we've arrived at that position that we started off earlier on in the video. In fact, I think in the game they played rook f8, didn't they, when they had to play this rook f2 intermezzo check. So all of those hard moves. I think white did actually get the draw then in the end. But yeah, black still has to find rook f2 check in this position. There was one more thing to cover, which was back here. Yeah, if white plays king g3, it is actually now a draw. We'll see rook g1 check, king f4, rook f1 check, king back to g3, so black has to try something else. Rook d1, and the white king has got to g2. I mean, white's hitting the e-pawn, so how does black make progress? Well, rook d2, aiming for a check maybe, but then we're at rook a1, and we've got the long-sided defence all set up that I demonstrated with expertise how to defend earlier on by doing it possibly a bit flukily against Stockfish. Right, one final game to go through then. This is a position from 2014. This one has an extra complication that takes us away from rook and pawn versus rook, but white to play. I'll give you a choice. Do you want to play king h4 or do you want to play g5? Which one? Pause the video and decide.